Jim Bahari.
Hi, I'm Melody Davis.
Welcome to Vintage Vehicle Videos.
In this next segment, curator Terry Martin takes us for a tour of the Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio. This was filmed in 2002 before their planned expansion.
Welcome to the National Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio. We're glad to have you here. This is the home of the Packard family. It goes back to the 1840s when Warren Packard came into town, and as the old story goes, he came in with what he had on his back from Lordstown. And then the two sons of Warren Packard were James Ward Packard and William Dowd Packard. And these will end up being the gentleman that will start the Packard Motor Car Company. Packard Electric, which was a division of General Motors, now it's Delphi Packard, still operating here in Warren. They started that, and they also started another company called the New York and Ohio Company. And it would be the New York and Ohio Company that would form the first Packard Motor Car Company. They had a division of it called the Auto Department, and it was there in 1899 that they produced the very first Packard. And Mr. Packard's interest came from the Winton that he purchased in Cleveland from Alexander Winton in 1898, and it had some problems. Didn't run like it should, but in 1898 there weren't too many vehicles running. And so after talking with him, he ended up hiring away his foreman and one of his main investors, and with that investor and his brother, that's when they founded the company here. This particular Packard here is a 1903 model. This was the last of the one-cylinder Packards produced here in Warren in September of, say, 1903, approximately. And it was during the summer of 1903 that Packard started really advertising nationwide. They would be on the covers, or the back covers of different magazines to promote their vehicles. And then they do stories in the different automotive magazines. But this summer, at the Packard board meeting in, say, April or May of 1903, they said, let's do something that makes a lot of noise. That's the way they described it. Let's let people know that we have the best automobile for sale in the United States. So they took this model Packard and shipped it to California by rail, and the plant foreman, a gentleman named Tom Fetch, of course, went out, and along with a reporter and the editor of The Automobile, which was a New York City publication, made the trip across the nation. It was an attempt to be the first transcontinental automobile from coast to coast. They didn't realize it, but so many weeks before this, a Winton from Cleveland, Ohio, had already started to complete that, and did complete it. They came into New York about 30 days before the Packard came in, but this still didn't stop them. They decided that they would go for the record. They ended up beating the Winton time by 2 days, so the traveling time was 61 days from San Francisco to New York. Since they had the editor of this auto magazine with them and his camera, they probably shot close to 1,000 photographs of the vehicle. So there are lots of photos of the car on record making the trip. Now the car that made that trip is in the Henry Ford Museum, and it's one of the featured vehicles that they have up there, and it's called Old Pacific because of backing the wheels into the Pacific on the West Coast, and they intended to drive the front wheels into the Atlantic, but they never did get that part of it done. So 80 years later, the vehicle that you see here, my son and I restored the car, and we drove the same trip, following the same route on the same dates as the original trip. And we completed the trip not without difficulty. Now, the mechanics of it are now 80 years old, so various parts would break, and we'd have to repair it or replace the parts as we went. There weren't any spare parts. In numbers, there were only 3 of these in existence at the time: the Ford Museum car, this car, and Harrow's Auto Collection in Reno, Nevada had the other 1903. So we're very proud to show it. The scene that you see here is actually sitting in sand, is to replicate the scene from one of the crossing the desert in Nevada or in Utah. The car has one cylinder, 12 horsepower, top speed of 25 mile an hour. During our trip, our average speed was 22 mile an hour. The exception would be if we went down a mountain, we would kick it into neutral and let the car coast to speeds of 45 mile an hour. Pretty frightening when you think about it because of how old it was. A little earlier I mentioned the gentleman from Detroit named Henry Joy that came down and bought into the company and moved it to Detroit. This car was owned by him years ago. It's a 1916 Packard, and it has 12 cylinders, believe it or not. So they've gone from one cylinder in Warren through the 4-cylinder and into the 12-cylinder during this period. But on the front here is a special little emblem that says Lincoln Highway, and that was the first transcontinental highway. He was a great promoter of that. And we in Ohio, of course, are well aware of the Lincoln Highway, how it went from corner to corner and out of the state. So thanks to his promotion, we've gotten out of the mud and, and look what we're into, 8 lanes wide now, I guess. I believe every man's dream in the 20s would be to own a sleek Packard Roadster like this with the rumble seat in the back. This is a 1926 8-cylinder Packard Roadster, bodied by Dietrich, so they would get custom bodies and put on the Packards. This wonderful car was on display at the Packard Museum in Cleveland for years and years, and thanks to their generosity, we have it on display here at the National Packard Museum in Warren, Ohio. And once again at the Packard Museum, we have a 1910 Packard, 48 horsepower, 530 cubic inches in that engine. If you talk about cubic inches today, that's a lot of cubic inches. This was also owned by the Joy family from Detroit and is on loan from the Detroit Historical Museum in downtown Detroit. We have a real fine working agreement with other museums to loan, and they will loan us vehicles so that we can change our displays from time to time. As I said, this would be the kind of automobile that Henry Joy would take right off the assembly line in Detroit and start driving to the west to help choose the route that the old Lincoln Highway would go through Iowa and other states west of there. This is one of our favorites at the Packard Museum, and that's a 1931 Sport Phaeton. It has an extra windshield in the back so that the people in the back would not get the wind. We give the same protection as the people in the front. Dual side mounts, and this is a stone guard. So years ago, to keep the stones from flying back and denting the radiator or damaging it, they sold that as an accessory that you could put on it. This beautiful Packard was in Shaker Heights for years and years and years, and a gentleman named Larry Druckenbrode donated it to the museum about 3 years ago. He said he had had his fun and it was time now to let the girl rest, and so it's a very good running vehicle. We're very happy to have it here in the museum. What we're looking at now is Mrs. James Ward Packard's last chauffeur-driven Packard limousine. It's a 1941 LeBaron limo, and it never left the hands of the family. And approximately 2 years ago, Tom Summers, nephew of Mrs. Packard, donated it to the museum. And Mrs. Packard lived a lot longer than James Ward Packard died in 1928, and Mrs. Packard lived until 1960. So she kept this car even beyond, you know, the newer Packards were in the estate, but she still favored this chauffeur-driven Packard over all the others. It's a dark blue. It gives the appearance of a black car, but it's really blue in color. And we had one of our local volunteers at the museum, Mike Yost, took the car and reassembled it, got the plating, had it repainted, and makes it look like it as you see today. Just a wonderful piece. Has a divider glass in the center that they can close the glass and she'd be separated from the chauffeur. She had a small speakerphone in there that she could talk to him, telling him where to go. And 3 years ago when we visited Chautauqua Lake area and did an exhibit in Mrs. Packard's Rose Garden, the mechanic who worked on this car in Jamestown, New York, came over and he gave us the story that every day you could set your watch by Mrs. Packard's trip with the chauffeur down through the park and around to feed the ducks and back to the house. There was a certain time every day that she did this routine with this limousine. Everything inside is original. The carpet, the upholstering, even the lap robe that you see there, that was Mrs. Packard's lap robe, and on cooler days she would wear it. The jump seat that you see here folds into the back. There's another one over here. So it was a 7-passenger limousine. Now the leather seats were standard where the chauffeur would ride because it had to be, stand the wear and tear of him getting in and out all the time. Well, this lovely 1937 Packard 12 convertible is as I say, a 12. It's a V12 engine, so they're back to the 12-cylinder engine again in the 30s. They produced them about 2 more years. This particular engine has 473 cubic inches of space in it. For $3,900, you could buy this in 1937. If you remember, that was about the end of the Depression. And this particular vehicle was a gift from the Bioski family in Austintown, and it only has 26,000 original miles, so you can see that the car is absolutely original. Well, everyone likes a Woody, I think, is the expression, and Packard sold a lot of Packard Woody station wagons. This 1948 Packard started its life in Cleveland, Ohio for a florist. And that florist happened to have a young fellow working for them named Ed Scrocky. Ed Scrocky is one of our Museum Association members. Ed knew of this vehicle when it was new and kept his eye on it until the period of time came when they weren't using it anymore, and Ed bought the vehicle and of course has loaned it to the museum so that people get an idea of what a Woody looks like up close. The wood is birch wood on the side, by the way. What we're looking at now is a very special vehicle. This would be one of 5 cars built in 1952 by Packard as show cars. The gold car that's sitting here is the original configuration with the grille and color. It was gold, the fender skirts and the spare tire on the back. All 5 of these cars are in existence. And the car sitting next to it to the right, it looked exactly as this gold one did in 1952. This was Alvin McCauley's son, who was an engineer with Packard Motor Car in 1955. Took the original 52 and redesigned it to look somewhat like a 1955 Packard, with the headlight shields coming out over, and you can see the grille has changed and the color. They actually cut the car down 4 inches through the middle, lowered it, extended the rear fenders, and put the Continental on it. You would hardly believe they're the same car. And his wife's initials or monogram is still on the door on the right-hand side. So they started out life together, used as show cars, and then sold to individuals who did what they wanted to with them. Isn't that amazing? That's really a redesigning. This is the end of the line for Packard in Detroit. This is the 1956 Caribbean convertible. And this car has a special story to it. One of the founding members of the Packard Museum was a gentleman named Ted Hurt. In 1956, he got a call from a Packard dealer in Sharon, Pennsylvania, saying that he had one of the last Caribbean convertibles for sale. Was he interested? Ted bought the car in 1956, went on his honeymoon in the car, brought his daughter home from the hospital when she was born a few years later, drove it for a number of years, and then stored it. And approximately 15 years ago, he pulled it out of storage, completely re-restored the car so that it looks exactly as it does here, so that it would look just like the day he bought it new in 1956. Now, Ted has passed away, but it's very unusual that a person would buy a car that many years ago, keep it, have the joy of restoring it and driving it, and it's on loan from the Hurt family right now.
Welcome to the National Packard Museum. My name is Marianne Propri. I'm the director of the museum here. What you see behind me and around me is a antique motorcycle show. This particular year we're featuring the Harley motorcycle. We have Harleys here from 1915 through the 1970s. But in addition to the Harleys, we've also added some very rare bikes, the ones that you see on the top row there. The 1904 Columbia, the 1909 Excelsior, the 1910 Thor, and there are several other very rare motorcycles. We try to have events here throughout the year that would interest other people besides the automobile enthusiast, and our Thunder of the Road show is one of those events. We plan to have this as an annual event, so you can check our website or check our schedule to find out when these events will occur. We also have a tractor truck show in June, and we have planes, trains, and automobiles this year, but we try to keep changing things to spotlight some of the other collector hobbies that people might be interested in, as well as the Packard automobiles. Every year in July we have our annual Packard meet, where you can not only see the Packards that we have on the floor, but we also try to spotlight other types of cars and other themes throughout those shows. Some of these motorcycles, like the Harley-Davidson 1915 there, that was called the Silent Gray Fellow, or the Pocket Valve. That particular motorcycle took its owner 40 years to restore to the condition that it's in right now. The 1910 Thor up here is unrestored, but that remained in the same family for 90 years. When we start these exhibits, we try to find someone who is in the collector hobby to assist us, and through a lot of research and several phone calls and advertisements, we come up with a very nice cross-section of the item that we're trying to display. In addition to the Harleys, we also have the Indian motorcycles over on this side, and an interesting motorcycle over there called the Nimbus, which is a European model. So basically, throughout the museum, throughout the year, you'll not only see Packard automobiles and very rare Packards, but you will also see other collector hobbies that we spotlight from time to time. Well, thank you for coming to the National Packard Museum. If you're looking for something to do on a weekend or a weekday or for your summer vacation, we'd encourage you to check out our website or call the museum and find out what special events we have planned, and come on over. We always have something for everyone here, whether you're interested in history, in cars, or in any of the other collector hobbies. We encourage you to stop on by and see us.